Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. In today's show, we will talk with Blake Lovell of Southeast Hoops. We will talk about Vanderbilt's impending hire of Jerry Stackhouse. At least that's what it appears Vanderbilt is going to do as we do this on Tuesday morning. We thank our sponsor, WellSpire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. WellSpire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We also thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Today's news brought to you by Sutherland & Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland & Belk is committed to fighting for those who've been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. According to John Rothstein, Vanderbilt is close to hiring Jerry Stackhouse as its next basketball coach. That will be the topic of today's podcast. And in other big news, Vanderbilt Chancellor Nick Zeppos has submitted his resignation effective August the 15th. My friend Blake Lovell joins us now. Blake runs the fine site southeasthoops.com. They have a podcast attached with that. Blake also has done some writing for us at vandysports.com, has been a friend for years. He is dialed in the hoops community. He's a guy I respect, and a lot of you do as well. Blake, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem, Chris. Certainly an interesting time, not only for Vanderbilt fans, but I think for really just the entire SEC basketball world, just based on how this season went and all these coaching hires and all that. It's a pretty fascinating time.
Well, you and I were scheduled to do this podcast probably an hour ago, and then my world blew up. The chancellor position suddenly is going to open at Vanderbilt, which I did not see coming. I was in the middle of getting a draft of a Jerry Stackhouse story, which he has not been hired as we speak, but it looks like it's headed that way, and that's the topic. But, you backtrack a while. Go back to August when the Tennessean broke the story of the athletic mismanagement at Vanderbilt. I don't ever remember a period of time anything even close to this. I think more stuff has happened since August than I maybe had my first 10 years on this beat. It has been nuts.
Yeah, no, it's been quite a whirlwind, and we've talked a lot, and there's always been discussions about all these things, whether it's athletic director, whether it's chancellor, it's all sorts of stuff, and really how they affect the overall state of athletics at Vanderbilt. And it's sort of an interesting time, and I think you see a lot of people that are looking at it and feeling like this is a whole new direction possibly for the university, and it's certainly going to be very interesting to see how things unfold from here.
Well, and again, nothing official yet, but the Stackhouse thing has legs. I believe that's where they're going to go. I really did not take it seriously enough until about Sunday night and started asking around, and just not a lot has leaked out. My presumption was that it was still a good enough job that they could get a college head coach. That's not the direction they're going to go, it appears. I do know they have talked to some I can get into, some that I can't. But let's just start with you, and let's presume that Jerry Stackhouse does indeed get this job, which again I think is what will happen. What are your thoughts on that hire? Because, man, you should see my phone and the text that I got last night and the discrepancy in opinion. I mean, and these are all people I trust. These are not people that are just spouting off, but it was crazy to see the divergence in opinion. A lot of people just absolutely hate the hire. A lot of people absolutely love the hire. And I want to go through because I think it is risky. The whole guy who's not coached much, coming from the NBA to college, that is an angle that usually does not pay off. We will get into that. But what's your general opinion if this is indeed what goes down, Blake?
Yeah, you said it. I think the biggest thing is this is going to be one of those hires, and we've already seen it, where you're going to see lots of people on one side and you're going to see lots of people on the other side. I said immediately, if I'm the one that's on the side of concern, my biggest concern is that he does have no college coaching experience. And that's the one thing that will stick out the most as, he goes throughout his tenure here. Is just that's going to be something that people are looking at. And, if there's one wrong move here, one wrong move there, well, why do we hire someone that doesn't have any college coaching experience? And I think that's going to be sort of the thing that people continue to kind of latch on to as we move forward. And it makes sense because you see all these possibilities out there. The usual route, and I said this to someone yesterday, is first you'll go for the top tier in terms of, okay, what power conference coaches are available. Then you'll go to that mid-major level and see, okay, who are maybe the best among this group. You don't really ever seem to go this route where you go with a guy who doesn't have that college coaching experience. But we know Malcolm Turner's background, and it makes sense. If you connect everything, it makes sense why he would want to go this route. If you're on the side of where you think this is a really good thing and you see sort of the optimistic point of view, I think I will tell you that and it's funny because I can remember talking to someone several years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago now. Jerry Stackhouse came up in the conversation. I don't remember exactly what it was, but we were talking about the G League, what he was doing with Raptors 905. They were getting ready to win the G League title and all that. He said that Jerry Stackhouse is one of the best people he's ever seen when it comes to just developing players. So if you're a Vanderbilt fan, and I'll be the first to tell you that I did not think, the previous staff did a great job at all when it comes to just individual player development. Maybe some of that's their fault. Maybe some of it's not their fault. But if you're looking at it from that standpoint, from a team that just went winless in the SEC, and you feel like maybe players really need to meet their potential, I think that would be one of the biggest positives. And certainly there's a lot more we can get into, but those are kind of the biggest things probably that stick out on each side there to me.
Yeah, there are certainly some things that I can see why they would want to do this. I mean, he went to Oak Hill Academy. That is one of the premier basketball producing high schools in the country traditionally. He runs his own AAU team, I think has since it's either 2011 or 2013, I forget which. But so he's got legs in that business and he's got contacts there. Of course, everybody knows him from the NBA. That's something that appeals to kids. Their kids he is going to recruit that remember him from the NBA, I'm sure. Although that would be at the tail end of his career when he was a reserve. But that's a name that's going to carry some clout in basketball circles. So there are those things as well. Now, I will get into the sort of the counterpoint to it later, but those are just the things in addition to what you mentioned that stick out to me.
Yeah, I think so. And the recruiting part, and everyone is going to go into, the getting players into Vanderbilt. And we know how those discussions always go anytime anyone takes this job. It's something that's always talked about. Well, yeah, maybe you're able to recruit, but who are you going to be able to recruit and all this other stuff? And I'll say this too. We talk about the mixed reaction, and I would disagree with some of the people who are saying, well, why would Vanderbilt go this route? Why would they take such a huge risk? And sort of why would they go this direction? I would counter that with saying, well, you know what? You went winless in the SEC last year, and I think you've probably mentioned this throughout this search. There's no doubt that the Vanderbilt job took a little bit of sort of a hit after kind of what's transpired, whether it's on the court, off the court with, we saw how the national media reacted to him getting fired and all that. I was on the opposite side. I completely understood why it happened, and it felt like it was something that needed to happen based on, when you go winless in conference play, all bets are off, everything's on the table, and sometimes that's just how things happen. And so I would say, maybe it's not the worst thing to try to take a risk because, like we said, it's not like you're just going out and grabbing sort of an unproven guy in a basketball sense. You're grabbing someone that has all this playing experience at the next level. He played for one of the best coaches there's ever been in Dean Smith. And he does have this experience in a developmental league. I think that helps you. Again, if you're wanting sort of that grittiness, that toughness, I think Jerry Stackhouse is going to bring that. He's always been a hard-nosed type of guy. And so I think if you look at it from that standpoint, he's going to be sort of a different type of guy, and he's going to approach things a different way than Bryce Drew. And I think for some people, that's going to be a positive point in this whole thing here.
Okay, let me hit it from another angle. They lose 20 in a row. They come off a season that before that set the school record for losses in a season. The roster right now is not very good. We're not even sure who's going to be on the roster. You've had a couple of guys go into the transfer portal and some rumors of some others. So The backdrop right now, I don't think a coach is going to come in. Now, if it's a thing where admission standards loosen and he's got some connections and can get some players quickly, I mean, you never know. I know this is a totally different situation, but you remember what John Calipari did at Kentucky when he brought in a bunch of kids. Now, again, that's apples and oranges, but the point is he's got different connections. He may recruit some different kids. There may be a little bit more of a fix to the roster next year, and especially if they can get some transfers, but that's very much in doubt, to say the least at this point. My concern, and I thought this at times, did they need more of and I know he just retired yesterday, but somebody like a Rick Byrd, who's a good X's and O's guy. He may not be recruiting McDonald's All-Americans, but somebody who could just come in and stabilize the program and get it back to respectability to take over from 3 to 4 years, because if this goes bad, that's going to be a pretty long drought, and it's going to be hard to build that fan base back. Now, again, if you bring in a guy who wins big, fans come back in droves, but I have questioned a little bit, did they need to go with the route with a little bit of a higher floor just so this doesn't turn into a disaster?
Well, and that would be my argument against it. And you nailed it exactly, kind of what some of the things that I've talked to people about since yesterday, really, in terms of just looking at this as a whole. Do you go the route of the guy you feel like maybe can get you quickly back up the ladder if all goes according to plan? Or do you go the route of the builder, that a guy that can just completely sort of build things from scratch from his perspective and with his own approach, and try to make things a little bit more consistent? At least maybe you're not competing at the top 4, top 5 in the SEC in the next 2 years, but maybe it's sort of that progress type of thing where you look at it, okay, we improved here a couple spots this year. We got sort of the foundation built in year 2, and now we're ready to start at least moving forward in year 3, something like that. And that's where we look at names that came up. You mentioned Rick Byrd, and we all know the names that were kind of circulating around at possible guys who could be that. And that would probably be guys among that mid-major group, like a Casey Alexander, Lipscomb, and all of that. And those are the different ones you look at and felt like, okay, from an X's and O's standpoint, and I've always said this too, you don't have to get 4-star, 5-star type of players coming in, right away and feeling like that's the only way you're going to be able to compete in the SEC. You just need guys who are getting the most out of their potential, whether that's a 3-star guy, a low 4-star guy. It doesn't really matter. It's just you have to be able to put the guys in the spot to succeed. And whether that's from an X's and O standpoint, where you're running more of a slow down type of style that we've seen in years past at times, where you're running more type of offensive sets and taking a disciplined approach versus maybe just a free-flowing offensive type of thing that doesn't necessarily fit everyone perfectly. So there's lots of arguments to be made for that, and that would be kind of my counter to the whole thing too, is do you go the route of a guy that, like we said, the concerns there with no college coaching experience, or do you go with the guy that at least has that experience, has proven that he's been able to kind of put his players in a position on the college level to at least, take a step forward, take another step forward, and so on? And I think that's where maybe the biggest thing that we're going to look at. And that's what makes this whole thing fascinating, is you don't really know which way it's going to go. You never know. There's no guarantees with any coaching hire, period. And that's what's going to make this whole thing kind of fascinating to watch.
I'm going to go to the mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Are you in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance? How about life or commercial insurance? You can call Josh, 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my insurance agent. Hope you'll make him yours, and please tell him you heard about it here on the podcast. Okay, I'm going to skip the questions that we have mostly answered, and now some of these we have already touched on, but maybe there's some details that we can get into that we didn't touch on earlier. GLH4VU asks, between running his own AAU team and having NBA experience, how concerned should we be with recruiting? He'll have connections through AAU. His name will resonate with players, and if he hires a good recruiter on his staff, they could recruit very well. No?
Well, that's something we didn't really get into, but the staff is everything in this scenario, and everything we've talked about for the past several minutes. It's all about who he gets on his staff. He has to bring in someone that has that college coaching experience, whether it's as a long-term assistant or a guy who's been a head coach somewhere else. And think about it too, all his North Carolina connections. I don't think it's going to be hard for Jerry Stackhouse to find guys that are going to be able to come on his staff, and that's something you think about too. And he just mentioned it with the question. Connections are everything in college basketball. I mean, when you have that AAU connection, when you have coaches that are experienced on your staff, you can make a lot of different things happen. You can get a very wide variety of players. And so I would see that, as a positive in this scenario, as long as the staff does include those types of guys, you've got to have someone that, like we've said, has that experience, whether as an assistant or as a head coach. You've got to have sort of an X's and O's type of guy, I think, in that scenario too. But that is one of those where staffs are always important, no matter what school you're at. But I think in this scenario in particular, because you do have a guy that has no college coaching experience, the staff's going to be everything, and that's probably going to determine a lot of things moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was part of Bryce Drew's undoing, just a lack of experience. Now, I got tipped off this morning that Matt Doherty might be a possibility. Of course, he's been the head coach at UNC. He is 57. He was at Florida Atlantic or Florida International, I think. I don't remember which. He didn't do great as a head coach, but that's a guy who's been on benches and understands the game. And incidentally, I'm told he resigned from his job this morning. In fact, he tweeted about it. So maybe there's something to that. The other name that I would watch, and I have heard, like I said, I get divergence of opinion in my text messages around the program, but the one guy that I have universally heard good things about is Jake Diebler. He had a big hand in recruiting. Some think that he was the best recruiter on that last staff, which the one thing we know is they could recruit. Jake is a guy that everybody respects. I think players on the roster are going to respect. That could, I think, pad the transition, especially with players up in the air thinking about what to do. I think that is one. Now, I don't know I think you give your coach your choice, but if I'm Malcolm Turner, I'm saying, hey, I would strongly recommend that you hire that guy too. So if that's where they go, that leaves one assistant. Of course, this is all a little bit of speculation at this point, but those are the two names that I am most watching, Blake.
Well, and now just to go back to that question, just to wrap it up there, I would be more concerned with the on-court stuff versus the off-court stuff like recruiting. To me, I don't think that's going to be a huge concern. We mentioned all the experience with his background, with all the connections. I don't think recruiting is going to be a problem. That's where, like we said, the X's and O's stuff, the in-game management, all of that's the biggest concern here. And that's where the one I would probably look more towards. If I'm on the other side that's saying that I'm really concerned about this hire, it would be more about the on-court in-game management type of stuff, not knowing yet who the staff's going to be. If you get a staff in there where you feel like you've got that experience that you need, then it becomes a lot more sort of attractive scenario. But, I would be more concerned about the on-court stuff versus the recruiting stuff.
Okay, let's see. Question from Superior. It says, what does Matt Doherty really bring to the table? His career has been very underwhelming, and I don't think he should get undue credit as an assistant coach for Hall of Famer Dean Smith. That might be a little much. He's an interesting personality from what I hear. I don't know exactly what that means, but I don't know if you have any thoughts there that we haven't shared, but if you do, go right ahead.
Well, I mean, he's just someone, and it's going to stick out is just because he didn't have a lot of success as a head coach, and there's no denying that. I mean, he just didn't. You look at really, what was it, that 1 year at North Carolina where I think they made the NCAA tournament, won 20-something games. Beyond that, he didn't have any sort of head coaching success at all when he was at SMU, may have been at Florida Atlantic for a year or two. So that's the biggest concern there. And, we talk about sort of the Carolina connections and the Carolina way and all that. No, not all those guys have been able to pan out, from a coaching standpoint, no matter what they were able to accomplish there. And, of course, he was an assistant going back to Kansas and all that. And I don't know. It's one of those where because maybe he hasn't been as ingrained in the coaching sphere in a while. I mean, it's been several years. That is an understandable concern, even with some of the experience that he does have.
VU Superior says, sounds like defense is going to be a major focus of Jerry Stackhouse, which is great, but what about offense? What kind of offensive sets will he run, as we did not fare well with the positionless basketball offense this past season?
And that's another concern because I'll be the first to tell you I have no idea what kind of offense he would run. People can look at some of the stuff maybe that his G League teams did and all that, but I don't think it's sort of a fair comparison. You don't really know how that's going to translate or what's even on his mind, and that's where too the coaching staff, whoever he gets as assistants, will play a role in that. But I agree, and it goes back to what we were talking about with sort of the X's and O's. If you were going to go this route versus someone that maybe is more of a builder, more of a traditional, run plays every time down the court type of coaching style, that's where there are concerns, because positionless basketball and all that's great as long as you have the guys at all five positions that can make it work. And if you don't, it can become a real problem scoring wise. And we certainly saw that with Vanderbilt. When you go during that long stretch of games, even really down the stretch late, I mean, there were so many times where they didn't even hit 60 points. And the positionless is great. The free-flowing offense is great, but you got to have the personnel to meet it. And if you don't, it can be a bad thing. And that's where it's probably too early to know exactly how they're going to play it from an offensive standpoint.
Okay, another area of concern, and again, we've hit on some of this. Let's see. Theodore 8 says, how big should the concern be that Stackhouse hasn't had experience coaching in college? And related to that, when you look at past coaches who have gone from the NBA to college, most of whom have failed, what similarities does he have to these coaches and what differentiates him from them? That is one of my big concerns, too. It was brought up over and over when I texted and talked to people in the industry yesterday. They were surprised that Vanderbilt would take this route for that reason. Okay, the coaches I can think of off the top of my head, Avery Johnson was the NBA Coach of the Year, just got fired from Alabama this week. Did have some success there, but not what they expected. You have Mike Dunleavy at Tulane. I know you and I talked about that privately. You think that's apples and oranges. Chris Mullen is at St. John's, just got them to the tournament. I'd have to say he's done a fair job so far. And, of course, Penny Hardaway at Memphis, who I guess has got even less experience than Jerry Stackhouse, because I don't think he coached anything other than high school ball in AAU. So, the thing that's obvious is that there has not been a lot of successes there. But this is also kind of a new thing, and there's not a big sample size. I just threw a lot at you, but what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the easiest comparison people are going to make is Avery Johnson and Penny Hardaway, and I would say they're different sort of scenarios. But it is understandable why people would be concerned, because it is. I mean, it's been tried in the SEC, and we saw it at Alabama. But I would like to say this, too. Alabama fans got very frustrated with Avery Johnson, but I don't know that I would call Avery Johnson a complete disappointment. I mean, based on what he was able to do there. But that was another situation where offensively they were never really able to make any progress because they tried to run sort of a different type of offensive system that didn't necessarily play to their strengths. So that's something that'll be looked at, just kind of based it on that. And like we said, I think it's easy to make those comparisons and say, okay, well, he's going to be the next Penny or he's going to be the next Avery Johnson or all these other guys. But they're all different scenarios, and I think different situations you don't ever really know. And sure, there's been lots of cases where it simply hasn't worked. And you see guys that maybe stay somewhere 3 or 4 years and they're out, and maybe they go back to the NBA doing something else. Who knows? But that's why we continue to look at it as there's a lot of risk involved. But if you go by the credentials, there can be sort of lots of rewards in this too. And at this point, we just don't know either way, honestly.
Okay, I think you have answered most of this question, but I will ask it just in case there's a base that you didn't touch here. This is from our friend Bighorn Sheep. He says, you're about to have a conference with the following proven coaches: Calipari, Pearl, maybe Buzz Williams, Rick Barnes, Ben Howland, Frank Martin, maybe Kelvin Sampson at Arkansas, not to mention Tom Crean, White, Davis, and Conzo Martin. Vanderbilt's coming off an 0-19 season and could bring in someone with zero college coaching experience And then the rumors he'll bring in Matt Doherty, who basically had no success as a long-term Division I head coach outside his first year at UNC. How should a Vanderbilt fan look at this as anything other than odds are greatly stacked, no pun intended, against Vanderbilt?
And then it's another thing you can point out. And I mentioned this after Auburn beat Kentucky on Sunday. I mean, of the 11 SEC coaches that are currently employed, and we're not talking Vanderbilt, Arkansas, or A&M right now. 6 of them have been to Final Fours now, and it's just like it's such a coaching roster that really is stacked from top to bottom, and that's where I think you kind of look at it, and it seems like Buzz Williams is going to be the guy at A&M. I think Arkansas seems to be close to finding their guy. There's one name in particular that seems to kind of be popping up a lot, and whether that happens, I don't know yet. So that's why I don't want to throw the name out there, but if it is this guy, it would be another someone in there that has sort of a proven history of success. And it just makes it so difficult no matter where you're at, whether you're at Vanderbilt or whether you're Alabama, who just hired one of the best mid-major coaches in the country in Nate Oates. You don't really know how this thing's going to play out. And because the conference is as tough as it has ever been, there are easy ways to poke holes in several of these hires. And that's where the college coaching thing, it's what I'm going to keep coming back to, because I think the lack of college coaching experience, that's where the staff is going to be so important, and that's what's going to determine everything here.
One thing that's occurred to me is there's an interesting backdrop. Okay, the chancellor has just submitted his resignation effective August. So there's that. You don't know who your chancellor is going to be. You have the fact that you've got an AD who is just now 2 months on the job and is learning how to be an AD and hiring a coach. And now apparently you're hiring a coach who's never been a coach. There's a lot of vacancy of experience here across the board there.
Yeah, it is. And that's why, to me, what I always try to do is sort of look at it. What are the most optimistic parts of the puzzle that you can see when these types of hires are made? And that's why we mentioned the player development. Players love the guy. He's been in a league that's all about sort of getting the most out of players and trying to help them reach their potential. Those are all the positive things. And I don't think recruiting is going to be a huge issue from that standpoint either, depending on who he has on his staff. But yes, there are concerns, and there are legitimate concerns. And that's why it really does kind of come full circle when we go back to what you talked about, just with all the reaction that both of us have heard. There's been a lot of people that love it, a lot of people that hate it. But when you look at the overall dynamic now of Vanderbilt athletics as a whole, it's a change. There's change everywhere. And, you don't necessarily always, some people don't welcome change, and you don't really ever know if it's going to change for the better. But the change is here, and whatever happens, it's going to be very interesting to watch.
Blake, anything else of note on this that we didn't get into that you feel is worth a mention?
No, I really just do at this point feel like it's sort of it's a process. The hire will be announced when it's announced, and from there you start focusing on the staff and seeing how everything comes together. And then there's so many different dynamics when you take over a job. And you know this, and everyone knows this, that it's just you have to re-recruit your own roster now with the way the transfer situation works. You have to get immediately into recruiting because now we are into April. We know recruiting's going to start picking up with AAU and all that other stuff that's going on. So it's a very sort of quick process. And while it's impossible to judge a coach, as a whole based on his first month or two in a new job, I think in this scenario, it's going to be something that does kind of get judged a lot based on how quickly maybe things come together from a staff standpoint, from a roster standpoint. Those are the initial things that will probably give us a little bit of insight as to how things are going to work under Jerry Stackhouse. But to go back to what I said earlier, really until we sort of see from an in-game standpoint how certain things are handled, it's just, it's a toss-up, and there's lots of unpredictable aspects to this that could either work or they could fail, and we don't really know which at this point.
Blake, you do outstanding work at Southeast Hoops. You've got a great podcast. I know you're going to be joining Chris Dortch and I over at Blue Ribbon College Basketball Yearbook some in the coming year. Tell people about the work you've got that's out there and anything else that you're involved with that you'd like to promote. And, of course, where they can follow you on Twitter, too, because if somebody follows SEC Hoops, yours is a Twitter account they definitely want to follow.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, Chris, southeasthoops.com. We've got written stuff, podcasts, and all that going up just with all the SEC basketball stuff. And certainly it's been an interesting time with all the coaching hires. And quite frankly, there's still more hires to be made, and there could still be another job that becomes available here very soon as well. We'll see how that all plays out. But the podcast, Southeast Hoops podcast, on Twitter at the Blake Lovell, and I've been doing some periscopes on there as well, just audio things that kind of keep everybody updated, because this coaching carousel, as you know, is very wild, and there's rumors everywhere, and you're chasing one way, and then you wind your way up at another direction, and it's just it's certainly a wild time, that's for sure.
He is Blake Lovell of Southeast Hoops. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll have another episode or two coming later in the week, so stay tuned for those.